As a wealthy businessman falls in love at first sight, he finds himself caught in his devious lover's game of deceit. Soon, his priceless devotion makes him a fugitive of justice, abandoning the life he has known. In a Cuban manner, Luis Vargas prepares to meet his bride-to-be, whom he chose and ordered on a list of American women. His friend, Alan Jordan, disagrees and tries to knock some sense into Luis, while Sarah, the house helper, eagerly ushers her master to leave. Firm on entering a loveless marriage, Luis dismisses Alan's sentiments as the carriage sets forth to the pier. Arriving, the wealthy man looks for his fiancée among the sea of people with only the woman's picture as a guide, to no avail. As the sun rises, Luis hopelessly looks at the ship from afar when a woman approaches him. The beautiful woman introduces herself as Julia Russell, Luis's fiancée. Looking nothing like the photo suggests, Julia admits she was worried he'd choose her because of her face, so she sent another woman's image to deceive him. Worried that Luis will lose interest in marrying a fraud, Julia proposes to sail back home. However, the surprised yet captivated man explains that he also deceived her. Not wanting her to choose him for his money, Luis claimed he was merely a clerk at a coffee export house but was actually the owner of the business. Having found common ground, the two deceivers agree to proceed with their marriage. Shortly after, Luis and Julia recite their vows in front of the altar, which witnesses the officiation of their loveless union. At the reception, Luis's friends and family cheer for the bride and groom. Julia invites her husband to dance as they relish the growing sensual tension between them. As the celebration ends that night, the newlyweds return to the wealthy man's house. Luis honors his timid wife, promising to give her time to adjust to their married life as they bid each other good night separately. The following day, Luis awakens as Julia enters his room and serves him coffee. The wealthy man learns that his wife also drinks coffee, contrary to what she said in the letters, since the drink is perceived as sinful. Julia seductively asks if he agrees, so Luis kisses her hand in reply. Soon, the wealthy man tours his wife to his coffee plantation. Julia wonders why Luis chose to marry an American, whom he regards highly as the future, whereas the woman wanted to escape it. Captivated by each other, the couple surrender to their desire and kiss until they share a passionate afternoon. As their marriage blooms, Luis expresses his joy to Alan and invites him to join them at the theater the following week. At the event, the couple watches the American play on the mezzanine with their friends. Alan's wife, Augusta, calls the melodrama disgusting, while Julia feasts on the theatrical composition despite the disinterested woman's opinion. Elated, Julia excuses herself while Augusta assumes she's only wearing a blush. Augusta claims she mustn't wander alone through the theater, so Luis follows his wife. Backstage, the wealthy man navigates through the busy performers and finds Julia talking to a man. When a man pushes the trespasser outside, Luis becomes furious as his wife sees him. Julia denies his accusations and claims she was lost. Luis believes her immediately as she engages him in a fervent kiss, asking to continue their passionate exchange home. Not long after, Luis receives his wife's letters from her sister, Emily, saying she's worried when her little sister doesn't write back. At home, Luis asks Julia to send Emily a message about her safety, worried his sister-in-law might send the authorities on them. Julia hesitates since she claims that her sister has always been unkind to her. That night, Julia awakens from a nightmare, so Luis comforts her and assures her safety. As she sleeps, he notices the scars on her back, wondering about his wife's cruel past. The following day, Julia shows her husband the envelope letter she wrote for her sister, so he insists on sending it himself. Afterward, the beautiful woman says she'll go to a dressmaker at the plaza, so Luis figures she'll need some money. At the bank, Luis authorizes the clerk to provide his wife access to all his accounts. In no time, Julia signs the paperwork bearing the full trust of her wealthy husband. Soon after, Alan wonders if his friend has fallen in love with his mail-order wife or if it is only the coveting pleasure he seeks. Enamored by Julia, Luis admits he's willing to give everything and take everything from his beloved. However, the wealthy man assumes his wife doesn't feel the same intensity and swears to change it. On his way outside, Luis meets Walter Downs, a private American investigator hired by Emily. The wealthy businessman assures that Julia is well and happy, revealing that she's also called Senora Vargas. Walter congratulates their happy marriage and offers to report the news to his employer. However, he insists on seeing Julia himself, so Luis warily invites him over some coffee the coming Sunday. Arriving home, Luis sees the expensive tapestries and new furniture his wife bought with his money. Regardless, he He embraces his wife and eyes her trunk, wondering what's inside. Abruptly, Julia says she lost her key and dismisses the servants to make love with her husband. Then, Luis smells cigars on his wife, who claims she tried his collection. Amused by the shameless woman, Luis asks if she loves him, who questions him back before engaging in a heated moment. Shortly after, Luis informs his wife about the visitor on Sunday, making Julia clench her fist in frustration and lashes out at the singing bird. Surprised by her outburst, Luis looks at her worriedly while she laughs it off. Later, Sarah finds the bird dead in its cage, confusing Luis, who glances at Julia accusingly. Soon, Emily Russell barges her way into Mr. Vargas's office and introduces herself to the businessman. Upset, she asserts that the letter she received, which Julia signed, is not from her sister, who bears different handwriting. Hurriedly, Luis rides horseback to his house to confront the supposed Julia Russell. However, Sarah reveals that the woman disappeared with her stuff, and the deceived businessman finds the wedding ring she left. Then, he guns his wife's trunk open but finds nothing important. Defeated, Luis accepts that Julia is never coming back, so he heads to the bank and learns that the cunning woman has withdrawn a large sum of money from his accounts, leaving an inadequate amount behind. Luis erupts in rage, disbelieving the misfortune his beloved has left him. Soon after, Sarah comforts the heartbroken man, who confesses that he wants his wife back while holding a gun. That night, the drunken businessman seeks to heal his sorrow in a brothel, where he angrily pursues a sporting woman. Passed out on a table, Luis suddenly regains his senses when Detective Walter approaches him. Distressed, the businessman reveals that Julia did not commit a crime since she is legally married to him. Luis desperately asks the investigator to find his sinful wife, no matter the cost. However, Walter must first find the real Julia, which he believes will lead him to the con woman Luis wants to kill. Not long after, the businessman teams up with the detective to look for the two Julias. As they ask around for the women's whereabouts, Luis learns that his wife is traveling with a troupe of actors. When the two men reconvene, Walter concludes that the real Julia is dead and suggests that Senora Vargas has an accomplice. Their investigation leads them to Havana, where they witness a festival taking place. As Luis settles in the hotel, Walter silently steals the businessman's gun from his suitcase and casually exits the room. Later in the hotel's restaurant, Luis hears his wife's voice and sees her together with a wealthy Frenchman, Colonel Worth. Taken aback, the businessman signals for the waiter, where he learns that the colonel's fiancée, Miss Castle, stays at the hotel. Hastily, Luis fetches his gun in his room before looking for the con woman. Meanwhile, Colonel Worth accompanies his fiancée to her room in hopes of a steamy night with her. However, the woman refuses his advances and sends him out. Unbeknownst to Julia, her husband snuck into the room as she writes a letter to a man named Billy. When Luis holds his wife's shoulder, he confronts her about her many husbands, but Julia claims he's the only one she married. Disbelieved, the businessman shows his gun, which the cunning woman bravely aims at her heart. Then, Luis accuses her of the real Julia's death, which his wife denies. She explains that she took Julia's place, who died in an accident, confirming she has an accomplice. Enraged, Luis slaps the con woman, who reveals that her partner in crime and life is the man she met backstage at the theater. She claims she wanted to get away and pay her partner to stop, but the letter she sent Emily blew her opportunity. Furthermore, she confesses that she's falling for the businessman. Fed up by her lies, Luis holds her at gunpoint as she cries. Overwhelmed, the broken-hearted businessman reveals his obsession with his wife, so they hold each other in tears and Luis spends the night. The following day, the con woman reveals her real name as Bonnie Castle, orphaned at a young age with her partner Billy, who gave her a name derived from a postcard. Determined to erase the woman's past, Luis interrupts her, insisting that she's Julia Russell, his wife, born when she set foot in his homeland. Then, he returns her marriage ring to her finger, rekindling their love once more. Shortly after, Colonel Worth waits for his lover outside her door. Suddenly, Luis greets him, unclothed, and reveals he is currently having an intimate moment with Bonnie, his wife. Then, the woman rushes to the door with Luis's revolver, so the shameful colonel apologizes and retreats. Over lunch, Walter surprises the businessman with a newspaper, revealing that Julia Russell's body was found with a knife on her neck, officially declaring the con woman a fugitive. Distraught, Luis insists his wife is innocent, so Walter realizes that his hatred has completely misguided him into love. Moments later, Bonnie insists she did not commit murder, which her husband believes. As they escape to Cardenas aboard a train. Starting anew, Luis and Bonnie purchase a house in the city when the businessman bumps into the the detective, who hears news about the con woman in the place. To divert Walter's attention, Louise invites him to a cafe where the investigator reports that Emily has identified her sister's corpse. Then, Louise excuses himself and returns to his place to escape with his wife. However, Bonnie is nowhere to be found. Unaware, Louise sees Walter, who followed him, learning the businessman is aiding a criminal. Furious about their relationship, the detective pins Louise against the wall and kisses him to taste the woman in his mouth. Suddenly, the businessman shoots Walter multiple times when Bonnie arrives. Louise stares, distraught over his crime, so his wife orders him to purchase 2 tickets heading east. Calming the agitated man, Bonnie sends her husband away while she takes care of the detective's body. When Louise leaves, the con woman uncovers the corpse, addressing him as her old partner Billy. Then, the con man sits up laughing, revealing he removed the bullets from the businessman's revolver. Shocked, Bonnie runs away, but Billy catches her immediately. He insists on finishing their scheme by milking the enamored businessman's fortune dry before killing him. Bonnie begs her partner to stop, but Billy catches her, asserting that Louise doesn't love her and destroys her vision of an ordinary and happy future. Then, the con man persuades his old beloved to abandon the businessman since he cannot live the same runaway life as hers. Soon after, Louise finds his wife eating in the kitchen. She claims she took care of the detective's body and readied their things for their departure tomorrow, leaving her husband confused. The following day, the couple stays in a cheap house in town to remain unnoticed. Bonnie intends to abide by her obsessive partner's plans, so she plans for Louise to go to Santiago to retrieve his money. That night, Bonnie wakes up distressed, preventing her husband from going to Santiago and abandoning Billy's plans. To get money through other means, the con woman teaches Louise some signs they will use to cheat on a game of cards. Soon after, the couple invites men to play poker in their house. Then, Bonnie goes around the table to serve the players whiskey. At the same time, she reveals Louise's opponent's hands with her gestures. Accordingly, the businessman wins multiple games, but one player learns their scheme and asks the woman to leave. However, Louise starts a brawl and gets kicked out of the house unconscious. Meanwhile, Bonnie is trapped inside as the players take advantage of her. Left with no choice, Louise heads to Santiago to sell his company shares to Alan without his permission. At the train station, the fugitive businessman confesses his crime to his friend. Convinced he killed the detective, Louise bids farewell to his old friend and heads back. Meanwhile, Billy slits a wound onto his beloved partner's back before having an intimate exchange. Soon after, Louise eyes his wife suspiciously over dinner. When Bonnie enters the kitchen, she purposely drops a plate onto her foot, claiming a rat startled her. Then, she leaves for the pharmacy late at night despite her husband's protests. Suspicious, Louise follows the con woman into a brothel, where he sees her reunite with the supposed dead man. Bonnie insists they leave with the money and abandon the businessman, but Billy plans to kill Louise and asks Bonnie to do it. Aghast by his wife's deception, Louise returns home quietly. Shortly after, Bonnie follows and finds her husband upset. Later that night, Louise pours the rat poison by the doorway while Bonnie prepares their coffee. The woman leaves the doors unlocked before serving the drink to her husband. Bonnie watches Louise hold his poison-laced coffee, but he sets it down on the table. Then, the businessman confronts his wife with his gun, demanding the truth. So the con woman reveals that Billy awaits her outside after she kills her husband. Despite her lies, Louise reiterates his genuine love for her, which Bonnie refuses to hear, believing that no one truly loves her for who she is. To prove his devotion, Louise drops his gun and drinks the poison while Bonnie tries to stop him. She accidentally drops the lamp to the floor, signaling Billy to enter. Hastily, Bonnie leads her dying husband outside and onto the train station while the con man follows. Billy sees the couple leave the carriage, so he catches up to them immediately. The criminal tosses Louise away and holds Bonnie at knife point. Suddenly, the dying businessman shoots Billy, who thought the gun was empty. Just in time, the station guards approach the commotion, so Bonnie requests for a doctor. Then, she shoots Billy once more to his death, prompting the officers to call the police. Grief-stricken, Bonnie embraces her beloved husband in her arms and confesses her love repeatedly. Sometime after, the con woman narrates her full truth to the Cuban priest who stays with her in a cell, awaiting her merciless execution. Moved by her story, the priest assures her redemption as she asks for forgiveness of her sins. Bonnie wears her wedding shawl and kneels as the pious man prays over her. At the time of her execution, the jail guards fetch the woman in her cell. However, when they uncover her shawl, they find the priest nervously praying for his life. Soon after, in Morocco, Bonnie attends tends to her husband's guests as they play poker. Then, Louise shares the beginning of their romance as he observes her gestures that will make him win.